Yeah, good morning. Yeah, good morning. I request all the participants. Shall we start the session? Yeah, I request participants to mute your mic from your end. So we are going to start the session. So I once again repeat, I request all the participants to mute your mic from your end. We are going to start the session. Thank you. Thank you all. Good morning. Uh, I welcome you for the session on corporate governance startup. According to the Economic Survey 2021 to 2022, India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, more than 70,000 startups and more than 105 unicorns. In the initial phase of their journey, they are more person dependent and focus on growth. This may lead to inadequate attention towards corporate governance elements. Such situations can impact the fast-paced growth trajectory, leading to governance issues for the startup company, investors, and founders. CII, along with its knowledge partner PwC, is organizing this session on corporate governance in startups to share thoughts of industry leaders on the critical issue of corporate governance that requires much attention as monitoring business growth. On behalf of Confederation of Indian Industry, I welcome you all for this session. I would like to invite Mr. Harpreet Singh, partner and risk assurance leader, PwC, to deliver his address and set the context for the panel discussion. A small brief introduction about Mr. Harpreet Singh. Mr. Harpreet leads the risk assurance services for PwC in India. He works closely with the boards and C-suite, helping them implement robust corporate governance, risk management, internal audit, and compliance programs. Harpreet has been managing a diverse portfolio of large and strategic clients for the firm and brings in significant experience in energy, utilities, real estate, and infrastructures, having worked with leading global corporates both in India and UK. In his current leadership role, Harpreet guides a large team of experienced and young partners and risk professionals who are equally passionate about bringing cutting-edge risk solutions to clients and further helping them to convert business risk into competitive advantage. Over to Mr. Harpreet. Thank you.
Thanks, Hari, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. Hope I am audible. I saw in the chat box that Hari, you are not clearly audible. A very warm welcome to this session on corporate governance and startups. In terms of the flow of the session, I will introduce the topic for today, and then I will introduce the esteemed panel members we have today. We have a very knowledgeable and learned panel today for this discussion. And after the introduction, we will get into a panel discussion for around an hour or so, and then we will open it up for Q&A. I do request all of you to please share your questions in the chat window, and we'll take up those at the end. Let me get into the topic for today, which is corporate governance in startups. And before I jump into the corporate governance, space, I wanted to talk about the relative importance of startups for the Indian economy, right? And as we speak, Indian startup ecosystem is third largest in the world, only behind United States and China. And in the last couple of months, quarters, we have seen number of unicorns in India going above 100. And these unicorns have a combined valuation of $300 billion plus. There is a Bain and Company report which has been released recently, which talks about fintech startups to reach a valuation of $350 billion by 2026. Last year, NASSCOM came out with a report along with McKinsey, which spoke about SaaS startups getting to $1 trillion valuation by 2030. And in the process, startups are creating a large number of employment opportunities for the Indian youth. So in that sense, I think it's needless to say that startups have a big role to play in the economic growth of a country and have become a vital part of our economy. So with that background, let's jump into the subject of governance. And there are some unique characteristics which startups have, which do create governance related challenges. Startups generally focus on hyper growth. They look at hyper scaling their business. Generally, they are founder dominated, at least in the initial parts of their journey. Agility, speed, creativity, innovation, faster decision making. Those are some of the hallmarks of any startup. They need risk capital. They are equity funded, so there is a heightened focus on valuation, which is there. And what we have seen is that in a period when companies or startups are going in for hyper growth, hyper scaling of their business, compliance processes, governance generally takes a backseat, right? And in the recent past, we have seen some mishaps which have happened. So overall, the startup story for India has been really fascinating, but it hasn't been free from its share of controversies. And we have seen, some challenges where serious differences have emerged between the founders and the investors, right? And primarily the kind of issues which have come to the forefront are conflict of interest, financial lapses, compliance issues, reporting delays, which in some sense indicate that there was not adequate focus on the governance related aspects. And I think that's what we intend to do today as a panel, to discuss some of these aspects and see how startups need to go about scaling their business along with focus on the governance. So in terms of today's topic, we will try and cover this in four themes. We will talk about the role of the founders in building a strong governance culture. We'll talk about the role of the board in terms of providing strategic guidance to the founders, and the role of the management in terms of implementing and taking care of the nitty-gritties as you go about scaling up the business and also ensuring proper governance. We will touch upon the subject of conflict of interest. I think this is pretty relevant, topical today. We will talk about short-term versus long-term, hyper growth versus sustainable business growth. And then we will talk about some key elements for building a robust governance framework. We will leave you with some tips on how to strengthen the governance frameworks in your companies, in your startups, as you go about doing your businesses. So with that, let me now introduce the panel members. We have Mr. Anil Chanana. I think he needs no introduction. Ex-CFO at SAIL Tech, and during his tenure at SAIL, turnover went up by 5 times to 50,000 crores. It sits on the boards of various companies, listed, unlisted, represents investors like TPG, Barings, etc. So it'd be very interesting to hear his view as a board member on the subject. We have Mr. Thiyagarajan Kumar, TK as he is generally called. TK is the Chief Audit Executive of the Times Group, and I think this is a group which has both traditional businesses like print media and new age businesses like Times Internet, and a lot of investments in the startup ecosystem. So interesting to hear his views on how he's helping his new age business from a governance standpoint. We have Vijit Anand. He is the CFO of Purplle, and which is an e-commerce startup which is now a unicorn. Works very closely with the founders on the governance agenda. He's the custodian of governance in some sense. So it will be interesting to hear his thoughts on the subject. And then we have Vikash Jain. Vikash is CFO of Hexaware, which is a large IT services company now funded by investors. Vikash has been with variety of technology companies like DXC before. He has worked in the consulting domain with KPMG and Deloitte. So again, welcome Vikash, and we'll be very keen to hear your thoughts and how your journey has been as an IT service company. So with that, let me open up the panel discussion and pose my first question to Mr. Chanana. Mr. Chanana, you sit on the boards of various companies, and you have been part of the management for a large IT services company, and in some sense, the startup culture in India started with IT companies only. And you represent investors also. So please share your thoughts on this subject and how boards are looking at it, particularly in view of some of the recent challenges which have come up in this space.
Sure. Thank you, Harpreet. Good morning, everyone. So It's very interesting. When I started my career, not career, I would say in the early stages of my career, when I joined Hindustan Computers, it was nothing but a startup. So the first sort of accounts I finalized had a turnover of 12 crore rupees. So, and we used to sort of every day sort of look for cash, whether we will get the cash to pay our vendors and pay salaries at the end of the month. And from 12 crore, it is now 93,000 crore company, turnover company. So our business model changed. And very interestingly, it was a joint sector enterprise with UP Electronics Corporation having a share in it. And while we are a startup, we were also floating other sort of I mean, the promoters were very keen to sort of experiment a lot of ideas. And we will float companies and we will say, okay, we want to start business in copiers, or we want to start business in instrumentation, or we want to start frontline stores, and so on and so forth. And typically, I will represent the company. I'll represent the company and sort of meet the promoters, the people who have been given this responsibility from the company to become the promoters and lead that business, having an equity stake as well into that venture. And some will be very aggressive, and they will have full control on what they are doing. They will have the control on their numbers, what their inventory is, what their sales are for the day, what shipments have to go, and so on and so forth. There will be others who will have no clue, okay, but they are still aggressive. And I had to go and build relationship not only with the so-called promoter there, but also with the next guys, with the people who are responsible for finance as well as their team. So through that, to get the information and pass on that information and bring it to the parent company saying this is what is going on there. So, but it was a very open, very transparent. I think what we had done at that time was create a culture which is open, transparent. A culture of trust and transparency is very important in any setup. That's how you sort of you gain the confidence. You get what exactly you want to know. And my job was basically to show the mirror, saying this is what is happening. And it's basically for the company to take a stance as to what they want to do further. They want to continue with that business, or they want to discontinue that business, or they want to change the course of that business. So many of these, some of these businesses survived, some of these businesses just didn't survive, etc. And some of them were very, very successful, like the software services business, which has been a very successful business. I take my role today. Today, I sit on the boards of a lot of companies. Some are private limited companies, but I still play the role of we have created audit committees even in those companies, though it's not statutorily required. And I play the role also in the listed companies and in the unlisted public companies. So essentially, I mean, each of these companies is a different level of, I would say, governance framework. And basically, as a board member, my role is to make sure, and together with the help of my colleagues, is to push the agenda of corporate governance. It doesn't happen overnight. I can't expect that next day they will sort of everything will be fine. And it's not, corporate governance doesn't mean, I mean, having a board, having independent directors there, and having 5 committees. That's not corporate governance. That's basically check the box. Ultimately, the corporate governance is the practices which the company is following. Those are the corporate governance. Are you looking at those aspects? Have you fixed your reporting? Have you fixed your risk management? Need not be a very elaborate process, but are you conscious of your risks your business is faced with? Are there checks and balances within the company? When a promoter is there, promoter is running the company, he has complete control over the operations. He knows exactly where the money is coming from, where it's going. But as the company grows, he loses that control. And it's sort of therefore it's important that he has that report every month, every day, whatever, I mean, depending upon the type of report. There's a full visibility which is available. I think it's basically very important for the investor to bring the promoter or the founder or the entrepreneur to their side, because everybody needs to be on the same side. I mean, everybody's interests need to be aligned. And that's how you can sort of make the governance successful in an enterprise. I would leave it there, and happy to answer any questions as we move forward. Thank you, Harpreet.
Thanks, Mr. Chana. I think you made some important points around building a culture of trust and transparency, in some sense, showing the mirror to the promoters or the founders. So let me bring Vijit into the discussion. Vijit, I think these are important inputs, and you are in a unicorn. You are the custodian of governance in your company. You work with the founders very closely. So if you could share with experience, how have you dealt with some of these aspects and focused on governance along with the hyper growth which you guys have witnessed?
Sure. Thank you so much, Harpreet. And I absolutely echo some of the things that Mr. Channa just mentioned. We are living through it day in, day out, every day. And hence, I can resonate with the facts that he has just mentioned. Yeah. In my view, corporate governance in a company is a very similar role to business partnering, rather than being a controller or someone who restricts business. It is a role that the CFO de facto plays, but he is empowered by the board to really enhance and step up the game in the area of governance. Even large multinational corporations continue to have governance enhancements through the course of their lifetime. So it's an evolution journey. A startup needs to start it somewhere, right? As someone who is a finance practitioner, typically we need to have the functional expertise, and it is imperative that we do a risk assessment of what are the top threats in an organization present, and then neither sugarcoat it nor exaggerate the risks, but lay them as facts in front of the business leaders, in front of the founders. With that, I'm sure all founders are very engaged and very much willing to give their blood, sweat, and tear to protect their business and grow it as fast as possible. So one of the parables or anecdotes that I use to bring the fact alive that it is important to spend time on governance is governance for me is like the brakes of a car. Once you have tested the brakes a few times, it actually allows you to go as fast as you want. You don't need to worry about whether I'll run the risk of an accident or anything untoward in future. So what we need to do is set up certain processes, have an agenda of evaluation, go quarter by quarter and implement a few every quarter, so that you're mitigating the risks, like the brakes of the car. When you need something to stop and check, the governance rely on them. Once you have tested, they are foolproof. You will have one less area to worry for, and when scaling up, when you're growing. So my view is governance needs to be embedded as a culture. We were very lucky. The example that I was given in when I joined Purplle was that we were sitting on a 3-legged stool instead of a 4-legged one. Governance and corporate governance and discipline is something which probably the CFO brings in. Growth, marketing, manpower, technology. There's some of the other levers which a startup focuses on early on. Governance is something when they are moving from 1 to 10. If they do not focus on that journey, it can impede growth. So those are my views on how we are living through this.
No, thanks, Vijit. And I think some very important points being made. I think you rightly said that it is not about restricting the business, right? It is about protecting the business from the unforeseen events. And I think aligning of the interests with the founders, with the investors is of paramount importance. So I think maybe Vikash, if I can come to you, yours is now a fairly mature company, right? You have lived through all of this. You have PE investors who sit on the board. If you could share with us how your journey has been, and also touching upon how investors look at it from a governance standpoint.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Harpreet. If you think about the private equity firms, the PE firms represent themselves as very active investors, demanding rigorous accountability, transparency, and adoption of best practices by the portfolio companies. Typically, when you look at any PE firm, they make an investment in a portfolio company with a time frame of 5 to 8 years because their funds have a shelf life. That's usually the time frame. And they exit their investments either by selling to a strategic or to another PE firm or by taking the company public. Now, it's extremely important for them to ensure that the portfolio companies they have invested in has the highest level of governance standards, because it helps making their exit much easier and also gives them a significant amount of premium when they're exiting. Also, if you think about that, any negative news in a PE-backed firm impact their reputation and the investment, not only in the company that they are invested in, where there is a negative news, but all the companies in their portfolio. So PE firms take the governance aspect very, very seriously. As much as they take into consideration the business performance, they take into consideration the governance aspects. And that's a good news for the CFO, because the tone and the culture is being set at the highest level. What I've seen from a practice perspective on the governance that the PE firms do is setting the board right. They ensure that the board, which has a fair representation of independent directors, people who are coming with leadership experience from different aspects of life, be it from the business side, risk profile, in terms of people who bring in financial knowledge. A lot of this, at least in my companies, and I have been associated with two PE firms, Bering and Carlyle, they have taken the role of the chairman of the board and the CEO being very, very distinct. So they take setting the board independence very seriously. Auditor independence is another aspect of it, what I've seen in the PE firms to be taken very seriously. And a lot of focus is paid in terms of the transactions, whether you have related party transactions, whether you have transactions with respect to other legal entities, which go through a very high degree of scrutiny. Now, when I think about my role in a PE-backed company, given the fact that the tone for the governance is set at the highest level, it makes my role much easier from that perspective. But what I need to ensure at my end is ensure that you're supplying the relevant information to the board at the right point of time. And it's not just the financial bookkeeping, it's about the business decisions which involve significant risk. Because one aspect of governance, and we have been in negative news multiple times, is investors' wealth have eroded because the management took very wrong decisions and the board did not have enough time to evaluate those. So ensure that that timely supply of information is there to the board. Create no surprise environment, keep them regularly updated so there are no surprises. And one of the things what we have done in my company is we used to be a listed company, and then we successfully delisted the company. We are close to $1.2 billion in revenue. But even though we are no more listed, we continue to follow all the good practices that we used to have for a listed entity. So those are some aspects which has helped us in terms of ensuring that we comply with the governance aspects of it on a day-to-day basis and ensure that there are no negative surprises.
No, thanks, Vikas. I think very important points being made. I think from an investor perspective, you're right that they don't want to be in the news for the wrong reasons, and it does impact the entire portfolio. You touched upon some important aspects around board composition, related party transactions, information flow to the board, and I think as panel we will explore some of those as we move forward. So thank you very much for the opening remarks to each one of you. Sorry, TK, I have to come to you. So TK, I think you have in your ecosystem, you deal with traditional businesses, you deal with new age businesses, you have Times Internet, which is a fairly mature new age business, you have investment in startups. So I think if you could just share with us one little bit about how you look at your two businesses from a governance standpoint, and also how have you supported your new age businesses in this governance journey?
Right. Good morning, everybody. I must just say that looking at the new age startups from a traditional perspective, fairly early, I was told that, look, if we were to build in all the practices which you have in the traditional well-run businesses, do you think Amazon would be where it is today had they had all these bureaucracy right at the start? right? So we were fairly early told that all these bureaucratic controls and processes would not be appropriate. Don't bring them to us immediately. So basically, the tone is well set. You know what the entrepreneur's expectation is, and they wouldn't like to be shackled with bureaucracy and rigor. So keeping that in mind, there are balancing this is three balances, I think, is something which we require to take. One is balancing the appropriate level of controls that are required in a startup. Most of the time you find a lot of money is wasted and you realize that a lot of frauds and wastages and whatever milestone that were achieved could have been achieved with a little bit of control. So certain elements which are depending upon the whatever business you are in, certain elements of controls which are required either in procurement or in customer acquisition, marketing, etc. Core elements of controls that are required, we need to make sure they are there. They are there from the beginning. That's one element, balancing appropriate level of controls compared to controls which you have in a traditional business. For example, most of the time we are told that you need to have three-way matching controls, PR, PO, payments, etc., etc. In any startups, this is something which you will find operating with a limited number of people, same people doing multiple things. You will not have these kind of controls available. So you need to be tolerant to that. Appropriate controls for the appropriate stage of the business is one important aspect when you look at them. Second aspect is what I call essential elements of governance. Let's put it as EEG. Now, all elements of governance, as you see in a listed company or in a well-run company, you may find it difficult to have them embedded fairly early initially. But certain things are basic requirements which we should make sure they are there in any startups, because as they scale up, as they recruit more people and widen their business horizon, personal integrity, emphasis on personal integrity and process integrity is very, very important. A code of conduct, it need not necessarily be very long and lengthy, very basic do's and don'ts, which needs to be well embedded, and then the people, senior people walking the talk. For example, a clear whistleblower policy, I think fairly early, if you put them in place, that would, most of the frauds, most of the irregularities will come to the knowledge through the whistleblower mechanism, whether it's a traditional business or a non-traditional business. In a startup business, probably this is very, very important to embed this basic code of conduct, simple do's and don'ts, and whistleblower policy, etc. The other third balance which one has to keep in mind when you look at this business is the balancing the risk and reward. Now, there is a lot of ambition, there is a lot of excitement in startups, a lot of things are started, huge investments. Now there is a fund winter, there is fund availability is less, but until recently, a lot of money was chasing good ideas and good entrepreneurs. It's not necessary that all ideas and all entrepreneurs will succeed. You need to make sure that there is a certain degree of risk assessment. My previous panelist spoke about having appropriate risk assessment, facts being put on the table, neither sugar-coated nor caution or put a fear into the mind of people, but assess the risk and at appropriate time check whether there is a chance of success before blowing huge amount of money. And if you have to call it quits or some idea will not flow faster, the earlier we identify them, take a courageous call to stop that business, that may be a good option, because most of the governance failures start from there and it hits the news little later. Initially, most of them are business failures, maybe ideas which is not to the context, or an idea which is not very well implemented, or a competition, international competition is everywhere now. Many Indian entrepreneurs found very difficult to stand up to the international competition which is there everywhere. If you know that you are not going to succeed, it's going to be a failure, the better early you close, rather than business failure resulting in large amount of governance failures, misreporting, and various other elements of issues. So from my point of view, looking at traditional controls in a startup environment, balance these three elements: appropriate controls, appropriate risk and rewards evaluation, and appropriate level of governance and integrity values framework. Start from there, slowly scale up. You may not be able to have everything from startup. Have a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year plan, slowly put them in place as the business grows. I would like to stop here, Harpreet.
Thanks, TK. Again, very important inputs. In the early stages, you rightly mentioned things like having a robust code of conduct, a whistleblowing mechanism, things like conflict of interest policies, anti-bribery policies. I think these play a big role. And I think cutting your losses is also a very important point, because governance failures in some sense are manifestations of business failures, right? So at some stage, when you believe that the idea is not working, it makes sense to quit. So thanks, TK. Thanks a lot for sharing that appropriate balance which is required between controls and growth. So let's get into the first theme which we want to explore, which is the role of the founders. And I know this is a pretty touchy topic, but I think it's a very important aspect of the startup journey. Maybe Mr. Chanana, if we can hear your thoughts as a board member, how do you see a founder's role in building a strong governance culture within the startup ecosystem?
Sure. So the founder role is basically first to create a culture. The culture, without having that trust and transparency in the culture, it is not going to work. If the founder is going to say to his people that just hide the information, it is not going to work. The information is not going to come to the board for them to sort of take any view about it. So creating a system of checks and balances within the system as well is important. So they should promote and they should work with the investors in order to create that ecosystem of controls, ecosystem of, as Mr. Thiyagarajan mentioned, about having that various policies, maybe lighter version of those policies and processes, etc., in place. So I think the founders have a very, very important role to play in making sure that their business is successful. Otherwise, it will become like a unicorn where you will see the paper value, but they won't realize any value out of it.
No, absolutely. I think from a governance standpoint, we always say it's tone at the top which matters the most, and I think that really comes from the founders and the boards. TK, maybe if I can come back to you, because you have seen founders very closely in your ecosystem due to the bunch of investment which you guys have. What are your thoughts? How is you seen founders playing this role, and maybe one or two good practices if you can share with the audience which you have seen in our ecosystem?
From a founder's perspective, as they say, the issue is the horses you back. How passionate the horse is, how ethically oriented the horse is the most important thing. Now, the guy on the top, if he's passionate for excellence and his integrity is impact, he walks the talk. That's very, very important. That is fairly early stage. We need to make sure that that element is there. Most of us are familiar with Mr. Narayan Murthy. Don't see him now, but go back 25, 30 years ago, and he used to walk the talk. Infosys was, the epitome of integrity, ethics, values, driven by excellence and values, they used to say. Now, values which is focused on interest of everybody other than yourself. Like conflict of interest, we talk about that. Most of the time, if you focus on others' interest first, society's interest, people's interest, customers' interest, if the person, the founder or the entrepreneur who runs the business focuses on these elements first, I think you may possibly have a successful building block for a startup business.
Thanks, TK. I think focusing on the wider ecosystem definitely is becoming very prominent, and we all know the focus which is coming on the ESG in that sense. So I think maybe Vijit, if I can come to you, look, you have worked with founders so closely, and it's a journey, right? So in the initial stages, the focus is more on growth and customer acquisition and things like that, and as you start scaling up, you start thinking about governance and better managing your business. So how has your journey been, and at what stage the focus has shifted, or not shifted, but focus has started coming on governance related aspects, and how have your founders handled that from a Purplle standpoint?
Yeah. So see, the evolution typically happens when from an idea to proof stage, a startup is usually unorganized. Founders are trying to do everything by themselves. From the proof of concept, when they are trying to scale up, that is the point at which a lot of the test of the concept comes in. That is when they need to convince people of that the idea is something which they can put money behind. And typically that is the first brush for most founders with aspects of governance, where an investor or someone incoming into the board would start asking some of the questions which they would not even have thought about. So once you're into a stage where you want to raise money, everything else, you need to also ensure that there is no leakages and there are certain basic hygiene practices that are already in place. If you are trying to then do your rounds and fundraisers without putting governance and emphasis behind that, you'd suddenly find raising those funds will be very, very difficult. So while you have your stat audits or internal audit processes, a fundraise is a process where you convince also others that, okay, the governance that we follow in this company is something which is very, very good. And it is not a check in the box process, which is where the founder's involvement and mindset becomes very important. Mistakes will happen. Are those errors? If there are errors, we need to get outside in information, outside in perspective from maybe seniors, mentors, auditors, whoever, because every company will have blind sides to certain processes. Every company will feel things are running absolutely well until they discover a surprise. So the idea is how many of those large vital blind spots you can cover with external help. That helps the company grow towards this governance journey.
Yeah, thanks, Vijit. And I think you rightly mentioned, look, once you have to scale up and you need external funds in today's environment, obviously governance takes the front seat, and investors do want to make sure that, look, there are no challenges from a corporate governance standpoint before they put in money. Vikas, if I can come to you, and maybe if you could share, how investors and board members, right? And then you received a lot of support from your investors, you mentioned about it. How can they work back with the founders and the management in building a strong governance culture?
Yeah, so if you look into it, I mean, from an India perspective, the last decade, we have seen some meaningful change on this space. And what I mean is in the legislative areas, the Companies Act of 2013 went through a significant change in terms of bringing more transparency and accountability for the companies which are listed. And even though it's a discussion more related to the startups, last year we saw many of the startups actually go the IPO route. So there are SEBI LODR regulations, new UPSI related norms. There have been a lot of emergence of governance and proxy firms, auditors' independence, and the increased scrutiny from the NFRA. We have seen investor activism. So there have been a lot of changes which have happened on the legislative side of the house, but still we come across scenarios where things have been done which has not been in the right spirit. So the need of the hour right now is not in terms of any more legislations, but ensuring that the legislations that we already have in place are actually put to practice in spirit and not just in letters. Now, when you think about the board and how can they, I would say a circular reference. And what I mean by that is the founders need to trust the board and the board need to trust the founders. And so the trust has to be in a sense where the board is supplied with the information on a relevant information on a timely basis. And this information, as I said earlier, is much beyond just the financial bookkeeping. Create a no surprise environment. Ensure that the founders actually helps in setting up a board where there is an independent functioning of the audit committee, the NRC committee, the stakeholder relationships committee. And I'm specifically calling out these committees. The reason being, most of the governance issues, if you see, which get highlighted are either related to financial statements or are related to misappropriation of funds, which could be in terms of executive compensations and the related aspects associated with it. You can also ensure auditors' independence by having companies where there are internal audit functions reporting directly to the audit committee and not to the CFO function on a hardline basis. So the way the board can support the founders is Once the founders are open to setting up a board which has the right mix of members with the business, technical, and financial knowledge, let them play the part independently. Be open to honest and constructive feedbacks. If you have the right people, they'll actually work as a sounding board in terms of telling you as to where do you need to balance out on the growth versus the time period within which you can actually achieve them. Board can also bring in external help in terms of a lot of the things. If the startups are small, we keep on hearing that, hey, we are very small, we cannot afford a full-time CFO, or we cannot have a function which is going to be having managing compliances is distraction from focusing on building businesses. Where the board can help is basically help them find the right partners, where a lot of these activities can be outsourced for a small fee. So having the right foundation from early stages will ensure that you are serving a long way in terms of developing your business from a future perspective. Learn from board can also give, a lot of the board members are actually on the board of other companies. And so being discreet and not sharing information in terms of what's happening at the other places, but you can learn from others' mistakes. So everyone learns from mistakes, but they do not be our mistakes all the time. Learn from others' mistakes. Be watchful of what went wrong in the other companies and ensure that you are avoiding those pitfalls. If they can act as a sounding board in terms of ensuring you don't make those mistakes. When we think about the startups, we are also speaking about unicorns, and you spoke about the number of unicorns India has already produced, and the Bain and the McKinsey studies which predict that how many new unicorns are going to come in. I mean, we can always debate about the numbers, but cannot deny the fact that there are going to be many more. And these are the companies which are going to looking to go public. Take help of the corporate governance and the proxy advisor firms who can critique the company in terms of where are you going wrong from a governance perspective, so that you can actually take those into consideration and set the practices right. So there are multiple different ways depending upon what stage and the evaluation you are in, from the size of the company to a small startup to a large unicorn, where you are from a fundraising perspective in terms of doing a private placements to thinking about an IPO. The key aspect here is going to be having a trust with your board members, and the board members having a trust and being independent and truthful about it, so that the inputs which are given are very honest and constructive.
Thanks, Vikash. I think this was really helpful and goes back to the same point of building a culture of trust. Maybe Mr. Chanana, if you could add to that, how the role of board evolves in the startup journey, from an advisor to strategic guidance, and in some sense also a sounding board. If you could share your experience, how you've seen board's role evolve in the startup journey.
Sure. I fully endorse what Vikash just mentioned. I mean, a lot of good points there. But I think what we need is a certain level of skepticism. If we go on trust, etc., which is perfectly fine. But somebody, the board as a whole, I would say, has to have some sort of a level of skepticism and try to dig more, try to ask questions. If you don't ask questions, you will not get to the bottom of the issue. So if there is information available, that information, somebody has to look at that information and ask questions. Why it is if it is benchmarked against the industry, benchmarking against the prior period, etc., benchmarking against the budgets, etc., and see where exactly there is a variance and why that variance is. So, getting more deeper into that is very important. And then it depends upon the level of responses, the types of responses you are getting back. If the types of responses are not straight, you can somewhere sense that the things are not right. Okay, maybe you may be wrong still, but at the same time, it could be one director, but then there are other directors which have to support that. So it's not only just hard questions, it has to be supported by more follow-on conversations around it. And I would call it more like a cooperative skepticism in a way. So I think we need to get to the bottom of the issues and then try to see that the company is right. We have to derive that comfort so that we can sleep peacefully at night.
Right. So I think that's an important point. In auditor's language, we used to call it trust but verify. So let me slightly shift gears. TK, if I can come to you, conflict of interest, right? And I think that has been a big challenge which we have seen in the recent past, right? Share your thoughts on how to better handle this, right? From a founders and a management standpoint, so that there is trust in the wider ecosystem.
As I mentioned at the beginning, well defined code of conduct, short and sweet, clearly highlighting do's and don'ts is the starting point. That's very, very important to highlight that. And what I've seen in my experience is the word conflict of interest is differently understood in different cultures, right? What a conflict of interest in American's mind or an Indian's mind or a Chinese mind are completely different. A Chinese will not mind, doing business with his relative is a conflict. He's doing business anyway, benefiting the business, but he doesn't think that needs to be declared. So basic thing is to define what is conflict of interest, make the people understand it, reiterate it often in your town halls, in your quiz and programs, educate them often and illustrate, and also demonstrate action where conflicts are identified and violated. Now, anything which is putting your interest first compared to the other's interest is a conflict of interest, whether it's the company's interest or it's the customer's interest or the interest of the other stakeholders. If you are compromising that, prioritizing your own personal interest, it could be nepotism, bringing in relatives of yours, friends of yours into business, doing business with, bringing your own employees, friends, colleagues, etc. All fine, but that has to be appropriate and appropriately, and what they call arm's length. Integrity of all those actions are very, very important. These must be well understood by key people running the business. It must be demonstrated by them. They need to walk the talk. It needs to be reiterated frequently, and also any conflicts of interest situations which is identified and noticed in the corporation, either through whistleblower or otherwise, immediate punitive action should be taken. It should be known to all the people. Soon in a few years' time, you will know that this is in place, because that's the fundamental for building a good culture in an organization.
Yeah, thanks, TK. And I think you're right. Setting up the right policies and processes from the very beginning does help. I think disclosures, related to conflicts of interest, I think that also goes a long way in building a culture of transparency. Vijit, maybe I think if I can come to you on the same subject, what has been your experience? How have you handled some of these sticky issues, if I may call them, from in your company?
Sure. So I'll come up with a couple of practical examples of conflict of interest and probably try to explain and add on to what Mr. TK said just now. So if you have employees who you have hired from amongst your friend circle and your known relatives, etc., right? I mean, in startups, this is quite common. You want to aggressively grow. You're convinced of the idea. You want others to join you. In such a scenario, do you also then put in processes of declaring these and disclosing these appropriately? So, for example, in a related party, relatives of key management personnel need to be declared. It is not by Ind AS 24. There, the definition is different. But you could bring that into your articles of association, or simply by governance, you want to declare that if there is a key management personnel, these are the related relatives, etc., who are also our friends, family, who is working in the organization. And the checks and balances are such that they are not reporting into them directly. They're working for a different function, things like that. So by being practical about the risks, you could dissolve some of the conflict of interest, or at least mitigate it to a large extent. Another example would be if suppose a founder knows some vendor who he knows that through his circle of founders that, okay, this is a good vendor. He can supply something to us of a good quality cheaply. Should I go ahead and not hire that vendor, or should I then install a process of making sure that we are taking 3 competitive quotes? This vendor is one of them. Evaluate them for the quality and price parameters. or whatever benchmarks you set. And then you mitigate that conflict of interest by documenting, okay, these are the codes, this is how this vendor fares, and hence we have taken a call. So by being practical about how to mitigate, because a startup is also starved of resources. It is not a very large company where everybody would want to work with them. But you can still have financial processes and diligence around it to make sure that such fingers are not pointed out in the future. Many a times people won't even realize it's a conflict of interest until things go sour, or someone who is disgruntled starts pointing out and saying, see, this is happening in the organization. Role of a CFO and the founders is to identify this ahead of time.
Right. Yeah, no, I think good practical examples, Vijit, which you have shared, and I think it is also about disclosures, as you rightly said, and understanding whether there is a conflict, and more than there being a conflict, whether it's perceived as a conflict. I think it's more about perception than a real conflict in that sense. Vikas, I think you would have fairly mature policies, processes around handling these kind of situations. Maybe as a mature setup, can you share some of the practices which you follow, which startups can look at it from in their journey in that sense?
Yeah, so TK and Vijit covered a lot of it, but I'm going to focus on or emphasize on two aspects. One is focus on process rather than people. And what I mean by that is set up processes that's going to actually help surface the outliers. Now, even in a company which is very well established, and I'm not talking about startups, companies which have been in existence for a fairly long period of time, very successful, there could be many policies. The two most relevant ones for today's topic would be the code of conduct and the whistleblower policy. Now, while these policies are in existence, most of the people in the organization do not understand the policies, and there are not enough refreshers which are done at adequate intervals for people to easily recall what's right versus what's wrong, when to seek help, how to seek help. That's the most important aspect. So people, are they going to be worried that if I seek help, or if I escalate some of the wrongdoings, so it could be my manager, could be a supervisor, could be my peer, is this going to have a negative action on me? So it's very important that when you build the organization keeping the process view in mind and not the people view in mind. People might come and go, but the processes is going to outlive the people, and you should set up a process which is going to help surface the outliers. The second aspect, what I've learned, is the subsidiary governance policies. And the reason I bring it is technology nowadays are helping companies go global in a very short span of time. And when you are going global at that point of time, you set up your subsidiaries in multiple geographies, branches in multiple geographies. Every aspect what we spoke about, the board, intuitively it is thought about it as the holding company, where you have a very strong board and the board is going to look into the governance aspects of it. But how do you ensure that the corporate governance principles which is being set at the corporate at the holding company level is consistently and effectively followed down to the subsidiary level, and the subsidiary boards are aware of those responsibilities? So establish a subsidiary governance framework and policy, set out rules in relation to the oversight of the subsidiaries with respect to their decision making, provide guidance to the subsidiary boards on their roles and responsibilities, reporting requirements to the parent company. So the point I'm trying to highlight is, more often than not, you would see a lot of those aspects with respect to the related party transactions, or with respect to the governance aspects, did not necessarily take place at the holding company level, but actually was something which emanated from the subsidiary companies. So ensure that that part of the entity or angle is looked into. So focus on process rather than the people, and the subsidiary governance policies, in addition to everything that TK and Vijit mentioned.
Yeah, no, I think subsidiary governance is a extremely important area, and I think acquisitions is an important part of a startup journey, right? And while now there are regulations around subsidiary governance, but I would say in some sense this is a neglected subject in the context of India Inc. So great point made, because I'm shifting gears now, coming to the nuts and bolts of it. Really, what we need to really do to have a strong corporate governance culture have strong corporate governance mechanisms to ensure that there is adequate focus on policies, processes, right decisions get made. Maybe Mr. Chanana, if I can come to you first, if you could share 2 or 3 things which startups need to implement, and which they can take back from this session, that look, these are the 3 areas or 3 things they need to implement within their company, which will help them move up the governance maturity scale.
So I think the first key thing to have a board, and we talked about the panel members, my colleagues talked about that. Having a diverse board with diverse ideas, experience, etc. It's important that the people have the ability to sort of express their views. The board should be encouraged to sort of express their views. I have seen board meetings just ending in like 30 minutes. And then on the other horizon, I've seen board meetings which go on for full day. So, I mean, we do just make sure that there is an optimum utilization of everybody's time, and we are getting the best out of our boards. I think that's very important. When we bring in people, we are paying them to be on the board. We just make sure, we also make sure that we are getting the best out of those boards from their experience, etc. So having a diverse board, and then the board has to act in terms of, as I talked about, one has to be somewhat look like a, I would not say like a criticism, but sort of a asking questions, be skeptical. And at times sort of a question what exactly, if you don't find something which is straight, etc. Or the things don't look to be stacking up, etc. So the board, the committees, few committees of the board are important, because at a startup, you may not be listed, you are just unlisted company, rather than having a multiple committees and then sort of a becoming a prisoner of the governance, have very light sort of a committee culture. And then the policies and procedures, set those minimum set of policies, the whistleblower policy, etc. in place. And also as an investor, they have to make sure that the related party transactions are not encouraged and are properly scanned. I think that's very, very important. Sometimes, sometimes we sort of allow that, and once it is done, then we sort of later regret why did we allow. So it should not be allowed in the first instance. Why we need to do a transaction? Why there is a need for a related party? Why the the brother, sister, or anyone else of the CEO, etc., needs to be hired? These are the type of things we should be questioning, and sort of a question that, and then unless you're satisfied, please don't allow that to happen. So all these are very important from a corporate governance point of view, because over a period of time, otherwise they get deep rooted in the company, and then it's very late to sort of fix those issues.
Great. Now, thanks, Mr. Chanana. I think the role of the board, diversity of the board, strategic guidance in some sense, protecting the interests of the company and related party transactions, I think very important points. TK, maybe I think if you can come to you, you would have helped the startups and your new age businesses from a governance standpoint. So what are the 3 things you would want startups to focus on as they go about building a strong governance framework?
First of all, don't get intimidated with huge expectation of various governance measures, which is talked about, which is flagged often, but have a clear transition plan over a 3-year, 5-year transition plan to put in place. The basics first. The basics are those which will prevent you from collapsing, huge wastages of money, big frauds, etc., which is basic code of conduct, whistleblower policy, do's and don'ts, etc. That would be basic one. The nextly you can have then once you have reasonably mature, you have reasonable resources, have the finances, start putting in place elements like good internal audit mechanism, and also adequate number of committees, and properly embedded ERM processes, and all other governance elements can come over a 3-year plan, self-assessment controls. So each of them can be embedded slowly, and don't, as I said, get intimidated or worried about these elements. Focus on those which we can prevent you from achieving your milestone and successes. Focus on integrity of your process and people, and have a transition plan. It can take 3 years, 5 years. Agree with your board what you will do by when. So deliver that. So that's the phase which, by and large, the entrepreneurs and founders are, by and large, through my dealing, they're happy with transitioning over a period of time rather than forcing them to do lots of things immediately. So there is a lot of resistance when you bring all these practices in place, log one time and say this is not there, that is not there. Sometimes governance, internal audit people have a negative connotation. Sometimes you say you are weak here, you are weak there, they get emotionally very upset, right? I'm building a business, you are criticizing me that I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, I'm weak here. So you take the emotions away from all this and support him, nudge him in his interest to protect value and minimize value destroyers, and take him along with you in implementing various pieces, which is code of conduct, ERM, operational controls assessment, sexual harassment policies. There are various pieces which are well known. They can all be slowly embedded, but over a period of time. Don't get overawed, intimidated. So that's the approach I would suggest.
Yeah. No, I think having a roadmap definitely makes sense. Could be a 3-year roadmap, and linking it to how your business is getting scaled up. Start with having the basics in place, and then look at building the various frameworks, be it compliance, controls, etc. No, thanks, TK, for these valuable inputs. Maybe Vijit, your thoughts. How has your journey been? What are the 3 critical things you have focused on as part of your growth journey?
Sure. So one, it's often talked about that the governance culture needs to be embedded, but how do you practically go about doing that in an organization, right? What we have seen is small positive assurance reports, small checklists, maybe 5, 6, 7 questions for different departments, whether you're following a 3-way match, was it taken for your largest dealings or in the last quarter? These are small checklists which start over a period of time, making people quite aware across the organization, not only with the governance function, that these are the things that we need to take care of. There should be no password sharing. Now, this is something which is quite common, but just a positive assurance report that your password and your system was not left unlocked or was not shared with anyone in the last quarter. Few of those very granular things, probably developing such a checklist would not take more than a day for anyone in an organization. But once you propose it to different parts of the organization, the culture starts getting permeated quite well. Second, of course, as Mr. Channa said, and Mr. Thiyagarajan, that have a roadmap. You can't boil the entire ocean in a day, but have a roadmap, have a risk assessment, and follow the cash. Probably that's the easiest way to do. Follow the metrics that you report. So question the key metrics of your business, of how it is getting calculated, what does it represent, and whether you're being authentic in it, in its true sense. That often is a leading indicator whether your business is doing well or not, or you're bound to fail in the future, and hence later trying to adopt random covering methods, right? So be ready to scratch level 2, level 3. People will not love you for it, but that is the role that you need to play. And you need to have the leaders and founders very much aware that unless someone is asking these questions of why something is defined in this way, what is okay, what is not okay, is that justification transparently available? That is very important for the business, which prevents future governance issues.
Yeah, no, I think Vijit, you rightly said CFOs and auditors are rarely loved, so I think that's all across. Maybe Vikash, I think if you could share your views on what are the things you believe are important while you focus on the governance aspects.
So everything that my co-panelists have mentioned are very, very important. So I'm not going to touch base upon them, which is particularly with respect to the board, the related party transactions, the governance structure, code of conduct. The 2 aspects what I would like to touch upon is the auditor's independence. While we have spoken a lot about the board members being independent and being trustworthy, how are we ensuring that auditors feel independent? And one of the best practices, what we have implemented in our company is We have an audit committee. We are no more listed, but still continue to have an audit committee given the size, and we follow everything what we did as a listed entity. The executive directors are not part of the audit committee. They are not. So whom we have as part of the members of the audit committee are only the non-executive directors. So the auditors, even while they are presenting their point of view, in spirit feel that they are independent. There is, and if you look into the companies, more often than not, you would find companies where the auditors actually resign. They don't cite their reasons as to why they have quit, but you can very easily figure it out that they were not comfortable with the management, even though it is not cited. So ensuring auditors' independence is very critical. The other aspect which is relevant for startups and even for large enterprises is decide when to go public. Because once you go public, you are into the eye of the storm. Every quarter there are earnings pressure. And is that going to be something which is going to put so much pressure on you that forces you to do things which are not in the right spirit from a financial reporting perspective? And I always love the way, I'll take an example which is outside of India. Michael Dell actually took Dell Computers private, and few quarters after he took the company private, he wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal where he said one of the best decisions he ever made was to take Dell private, because all his leadership team was very excited in terms of creating wonderful products for the future, and we're not getting guided by what the quarterly numbers are going to be, and they were thinking from a long-term perspective. That is very, very important, because when you decide to go public and you look into the companies, and I don't need to take the names, how many of the startups went public last year, and where are their share prices trading at? Were you ready? Were you mature enough to go public? So that is one aspect which the startups need to take into consideration very seriously, because otherwise you are putting a unnecessary pressure on you, because when you are in a startup journey, a lot of the aspects are very, very volatile. It's not fairly settled, and the markets could be very harsh. And so decide the timing of when to go public with a lot more caution and with a lot more, I would say, skepticism.
Yeah, no, I think both very important points, Vikas. I think auditors' independence, and I will put both external and internal auditors, together in that thing, and also when to go public. So I think we have now got a bunch of questions. I'm cognizant of time. Maybe we can take up a few questions which we've received from the audience. The first one is there any connection between corporate governance and profitability, especially in the short term? We have two CFOs on the panel. Maybe Vijit, Vikas, you want to talk about this?
I would say, I'm not too sure from a short-term perspective, but from a long-term perspective, I can completely vouch for it that there is a very strong correlation. Companies where the corporate governance are strong, the employees feel empowered, the employees feel free, they feel liberated, they are not under the pressure, they can have peaceful sleep. They can have sleepless nights for business performance, but they don't have sleepless nights because something is being done wrong or incorrect. And that actually gets reflected in terms of the quality of the service, the quality of the product, the quality of the trust you build with your clients, with your partners, with your employees. And that finally gets translated in terms of the performance for the business. There are going to be cycles in terms of the demand and supply, but a good corporate governance is definitely going to ensure that you have, and the most brilliant example what you can have in this country more than anywhere else is the House of Tatas. If you look into it, it's trust. It's the trust that the vendors, the clients, the investors, the employees have on that brand, which has been built over a decade because of their ethical practices, is the premium that they get. And that definitely gets reflected in their results. So I don't think there's a short-term answer to it, but from a medium-term and a long-term perspective, there is a very strong correlation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the good measure is to look at the PE multiples of listed companies. Companies with good governance records, their PE multiples are far, far higher than their peers. So I think the next one is around ethical dilemmas. Maybe Mr. Chanana, if I can come to you, how do you handle a situation where an action, decision, judgment is legally correct but morally wrong?
Very simple. Just imagine what will happen if it appears in the press. How the people will see it. If it passes the test, it's fine. If it doesn't pass the test, don't do it.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
completely echo the point. Ethics is something that it's a set of internal beliefs and values, right? You have them whether there is a law around it or whether someone watching or whether someone is not watching. If it's a decision, so hence the presence of a law or absence of a law should not really matter when it comes to anything which is a dilemma for you. And as Mr. Channa said, yeah, put it in a forum where you don't have a chance of self-defense, where you're not allowed to speak in self-defense. At that forum, will this be a justified action or not?
Yeah,
The,
no, fair point.
the law is the minimum requirement.
Yeah.
But a good corporate governance standard would be, are you doing what your conscience tells you is the right thing to do in that particular context? So that should be the touchstone with which you need to take a decision on such conflict situations.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think in terms of building a strong governance culture, these things are extremely important. You encounter these situations almost on a daily basis. TK, you had mentioned about exiting, the business when it's not working out, and business failure resulting in governance failure. So we have a question which is that, look, startups obviously are not formed with the intention of closure, but there could be circumstances when the venture needs to be closed. So how do you build a roadmap which has this kind of planning built in, that look, there could be a point where we might have to exit? So how do you really do that practically, and how do founders make that happen, given that they are so passionate about their ideas?
That's an extremely difficult question, difficult situation, which most of the time which one is encountered with. Somebody is passionate, whose brainchild is a product or a business idea, to accept that it is no longer relevant doesn't happen early. It's a very, very painful process. And most of the time, somebody outside of the ecosystem has to observe them and then give them practical, objective, honest input, saying that, look, this won't fly in the context of ABC that is happening in the external environment. Trust you, judge you, but just make sure that we don't damage more value, more resources. Sometimes the longer you wait, whatever value is left of the business, that itself you may not be able to realize. And if you don't take a call at the right time, the interest of various people, for example, you don't tell your employees who are working with you that you are no longer in a position to run the business, finance is becoming a big constraint. You want to stop early so that you find ways for your employees to find home somewhere else in time. If you delay the whole thing, then the pain will be very high in the whole system. So that is one. Secondly, getting value out of whatever is left of that enterprise will also be a problem. So it's a difficult call. Have a honest feedback from trustworthy, integrity, high people around you. It could be internal auditors, it could be strategic consultants, it could be the board. All of them together, if they advise you something which is not fly, it's better to get out quickly. I can tell you many instances where the competition is global today. Many ideas 15 years ago, what thought we would succeed here today in this country, we could not succeed because today you're competing with the global big giants here. Now, if you are thinking you're going to be a great digital media company, and you know that bulk of the digital media business is going to Google, Facebook, Amazon, and also various other digital entities, and you want to keep on pumping money, then you are probably fooling yourself, and you need to take a call. Will I succeed in this venture, digital venture? Vis-a-vis so-and-so, who is very well entrenched, well-resourced, have the global expertise. So you need to be realistic about it and take a call at the right time so that you restrict your further damage to people and your own value left in the business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Maybe Vijit, Vikash, Mr. Chanana, if you want to add to this, what TK said, it's a pretty important question, when to quit.
Sure. I think, what Mr. Thiyagarajan is very much valid, that exit the business if it is bleeding at the earliest. But, however, while we are doing the business, there are various learnings which are taking place, and there could be an opportunity to pivot the business to an entirely different to a different area or a different, to give it a different angle. I think that's why where the entrepreneur mind is working. So entrepreneurs are different people. They have a different, I mean, you call it like entrepreneurs are made of a different mitti type. So, I mean, that spirit is still there. So you have to use that spirit and pivot the business to that different cause or different purpose. I think that's very important. So don't give it a, I mean, I would say, yes, I mean, bleed that, stop the bleeding which is happening. But at the same time, look at where we can pivot the business towards. That's important.
Yeah, so I think the point that both of you are making, your business could be, your idea could be ahead of its time, or it could be late. So you need to be very true on to what problem are you trying to solve when you through your startup, which is the one single statement that your startup is going to address, which others, your competition either does not have or will take time to reach to that stage, or is it something which is easily replicable, and in which case you need to figure out probably the problem you started out solving is already solved for, and you need to pivot to something else. If the answer to all these three questions, that I don't know what problem I'm trying to solve, then you're probably trying to simply compete in a crowded market. So be very careful and pull the plug there.
Great. Thanks, Vijit. Maybe Vikash, if I can come to you for the next question. How does technology play a role in corporate governance?
Massive roles. The way the technology, and I'm in a company which is in the space of IT, so I'll always sell that, right? So as much as technology has been an enabler in terms of all facets of the business, it's played a big role in terms of the corporate governance. And I'll take one simple example from my company, which can be relevant for many others. For a company of our size, which is modest, which is, I said, a $1.2 billion in terms of revenue, which is modest in comparison to many other companies that we have from a India perspective, and globally, it's not even going to feature in the top, anywhere in the top list. We have presence in close to 40 different countries. And when we think about the governance, we have to think about the governance not only from an India perspective, but we have to think about the governance from all the other geographies. How do you ensure that you are in compliance with all of it being headquartered in India? It's not going to be practically feasible for you to make investments into people, into resources in all of these geographies. The only way to ensure that you are on the top of your game is through the technology. And you have, as I said, look for external help. So you have a lot of firms, and I'll say big four, and Harpreet is here, but PwC also has it, EMI has it, KPMG has it, Deloitte has it. Think about many other firms who already have this offering, wherein you actually can take the expertise of them in terms of understanding what are the policies and the rules of the law of the land for each individual countries that the company need to be compliant with. And you can use IT as an enabler in terms of tracking those. So you place that into your company, make people who are responsible in terms of ensuring that you are in compliance with the law. You can get a dashboard on a day-to-day basis in terms of ensuring that whether you are in compliance with the various aspects of the laws. That's a very simple aspect. Related party transactions, very easy to track. If you are wanting to do in terms of any transactions across the world with certain individuals, you have an identifier. How do you get to know about it? When you think about the financial reporting, the ERP systems actually help you to ensure that you have the reportings and the notes to accounts come out of the systems in a timely fashion. One of the things that Harpreet mentioned at the beginning of the call is one of the challenges that a lot of the startups have is delays in reporting. Delays in reporting also has a significant impact in terms of running of the businesses. So technology from that perspective is a great enabler in terms of ensuring that you have the transparency, you have the confidence, you have the you are on the right side of the law from a compliance perspective. Those are just few examples.
Yeah. Absolutely, Vikas. And I think having even a technology roadmap, right? When do you want the ERP system to be in place? When do you want to have some of these GRC systems which are there, which can help you automate your governance, risk, and compliance processes is also extremely important. As you grow in size, if you're a multi-territory, multi-country organization, these things become extremely important. TK, if I can come to you next, there's the question around certification. So is there a body or which can certify the governance practices, right? Honestly, I haven't seen any certificate of that nature, but you were on the board of IIA. Are there certifications which exist which companies can take?
See, direct governance certification, I've not come across anybody giving you, but there are various facets of governance elements where you can get maturity models, which you can get it done. For example, you have various maturity models for ERM. So COSO framework 2017 gives you a framework against which you can benchmark and you can go ahead. And I've seen a maturity model on various governance practices from an European enterprise, which is nobody mandates that, but that Nexum has got a maturity model on governance maturity based on different elements, which you can look at that where you are, etc. Most of the startups probably can start with the basic thing, and then over a period of time, as you mentioned, we can go towards that. If anybody is interested in looking at that maturity model of the European consultancy firm, I can separately share it with them. I've seen some, but nothing mandated. It's a private consulting model which I've seen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I think there are reviews which can be done on the specific aspects of the governance framework, but I also haven't seen anything which gives you a complete comfort. And I think in some sense, these certificates also may not help. It is about culture and doing the right things. Mr. Chana, there are a couple of questions related to board. I'm cognizant of time. One is around, how can boards really coach the founders, right? How can they, you did mention about skepticism and, questioning the founders or questioning the management, but how can the board be a coach in this journey? It's a pretty interesting question. So it will be interesting to hear your views.
Sure. So I think it's not only the skepticism which the board has to play the role of being a skeptic here, but also being a partner to the founder and the CEO there. This is very common in the enterprises where I have worked, as well as in the companies where I'm serving. So, like some of my portfolio companies where I'm on the board, I would sort of speak to the CEO separately out of the board meeting, from the board meeting, maybe once in a month, etc. Nothing to do with the board agenda, but maybe just a separate, whatever he wants to bounce, etc. Any questions, etc. Any advice. I think it's basically for the founder or the CEO to take the help of the board and sort of make the board like a sounding board, sort of a thing that what if we do this, what if we do that, and sort of get some answers, get views, and then sort of take it to the board saying that this has been sort of deliberated internally with the board members as well, and then there is a consensus building, etc. in that decision. That really helps a lot, I would call it. So certainly the board can be a huge beneficial, can be a huge benefit so far as the founders and investors are concerned.
Yeah. And I think one of the things which I have seen which has worked well is actually doing governance trainings for the founders, right? So that's something which definitely boards can play a role and work with external consultants to run those trainings and raise the awareness. Vijit, Vikash, any of you? I think while the answer is fairly clear, but what entices the investor more? A startup with a steady revenue growth and profitability, or a unicorn with no revenues? So any quick comments? I think this is the excessive focus on valuation.
It's a sitter in many senses. The power of compounding over 25 years at 20% is much more massive than any amount of revenues you can get in 1 year or 2 years. Or so not even comparing with a revenue which may not be existent, but definitely the power of compounding at a steady growth at any time, to me personally, would be much more lucrative.
Yeah, because maybe
I'll look at there's another aspect of it. Company with a steady revenue and a stable profit, or a company with exponential revenue and no profits. That's the hot topic nowadays. I'm a conservative investor, and for me, the first one is definitely the winner in a heartbeat, which is basically a company with a stable revenue with a reasonable level of profits. Because end of the day, I believe in the philosophy that cash is king. And if you're not making profit, you are actually burning cash. At some point of time, you need to start showing to the investors the returns associated with the investments that has been made. And if it is that 10 years, 15 years, 20 years out into the future, we don't know whether that is going to even get realized. And the reason I say that is a lot of those companies which basically come back and say that in 20 years, I'm going to be making profits are the companies which were formed in the last 10 years and technology actually enabled them. You know, the pace of the change at which the technology is actually helping the businesses change, I don't even know whether this companies from a business model perspective will continue to be there for the next 20 years, because technology might completely change and these business models may not be viable anymore. There could be other business models which are going to come in. So it's a personal aspect in terms of how you do the valuation. Different people might have different aspects related to it or viewpoints associated with it. There are a lot of folks whom you will find out and they'll give you the reasons as to, when you think about it, why is it that you should be looking into it from companies with profits in the future. But for me, it's companies with a steady revenue, with a reasonable amount of stable profits and a cash generating business.
I would put, say, 70% in a steady business and 30% in a exponential potential business. It's a matter of blending the two rather than one instead of another.
Yeah. No, I think it is always that lure of getting rich overnight, right? so I think no.
Important.
Yeah, Mr. Chanana, yeah, please go ahead.
It's the idea which is very important, and how that sound that idea is. Is it doable or not doable? I mean, a lot of things have just got created with no zero revenues. So let's not forget that. So a lot of ideas like Amazons of the world was zero revenues. They asked Googles of the world was zero revenues. So I mean, we have to support that idea. I'm not saying one versus the other, but I think it's one has to test it from various angles, from a technological angle, whether it's doable or not, and then sort of take a view on the investment. Yeah.
No, I think I'm cognizant of time, so we are coming at the fag end of the discussion. So I think there are a lot of points which got discussed, and I think TK and other panel members you mentioned about having a roadmap from a corporate governance standpoint. So what I thought, maybe it would make sense to just share this with the participants. It does touch upon some of the aspects which we discussed today, and I thought may be relevant for the audience. So I think from a corporate governance standpoint, these are some of the elements which you can consider as you go about building a strong governance culture in your organization. Start with the strategic level, which is like Mr. Chanana spoke about, the composition of the board, the role of the board, the role of the various committees which can exist depending on your size and scale. Entry-level controls, I think TK, you touched upon this, code of conduct, related party transactions, conflict of interest policies, anti-bribery policies, having a very strong whistleblowing mechanism. I think those are some of the things which initially needs to be done. So have a strong governance culture. As you move further in your journey, focusing on building various frameworks which can really strengthen the governance culture, having a compliance framework to ensure you comply with the laws of the land, having a controls framework to ensure policies and processes are robust, having a risk management framework to ensure that risks which matter and which can really hit the business continuity as well. Looking at cybersecurity, which is a key risk these days, and could be business threatening, and business continuity may come into a challenge if this is not addressed well. And then start looking at building monitoring mechanisms, right? So we spoke about audit, internal audit, external audit, independence of those, compliance reviews which get done, testing of the controls, which is now a mandatory requirement under the Companies Act. So I think those are some of the monitoring mechanisms you can put in place, which will give you early warning signals if things are not going in the right direction. So I think let me take a pause here. Thank all the panel members. It was, I think, a pretty enriching discussion, a lot of useful input shared, and I think at least I'm going back much more informed and learned than maybe 1.5 hours before. So with that, let me hand it over back to Hariharan, and thank you very much.
Hari, you are muted.
So I would like to thank all the speakers and the participants, and also our knowledge partner, PwC, for the wonderful support and coordination for this initiative. I request all the participants to register in our Iconn platform. We will share the URL in the chat now. So thank you, Mr. Harpreet and PwC and all the panelists. Once again, wishing you all a happy Diwali. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy Diwali.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you, Harpreet, Chanana, Vijit, Vikash as well. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks,
for
everyone.
the audience as well. Good deliberations.